Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Joel. You know, we really should hire an audio engineer or something. I'm the audio
I
engineer.
guess we could, yeah, I suppose. But I think you're doing a great job. I just
All right,
stand
well,
here.
thanks.
I'm enjoying it.
Well, I thought today we would continue the series we're doing on the book that's out now, available anywhere books are sold. Keep It Light, The Freedom of Priorities in Life, Work, and Love. It's basically a book about the idea that we only have so much time, only have so much money, only have so much energy, and you got to be really selective about what you're going to say yes to, what you're going to say no to, which is where today's chapter comes in on boundaries, chapter 6, which honestly, it was the chapter of the book that gave me the most, I went in with the most fear and trembling because I've just seen, ever since the book came out by Henry Cloud and Townsend, great book, incredible book. But like anything, people take it and they'll use it for their own purposes, kind of like people would do with the Bible. And they'll use it actually to isolate themselves or not deal with people they don't like. And they'll be like, I'm just creating a healthy boundary. And it actually really isn't a boundary. What they're really doing is just shutting everyone out. There's a proverb, King Solomon, he says, he who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against sound judgment, which is a pretty intense statement. He's basically saying it's not wise to isolate yourself. And oftentimes we use boundaries and then we wonder why we're so lonely, but it's because you've created so many boundaries. So did you get a chance to read the chapter?
Well, of course I did, yeah.
All right, give me your take on it.
Well, I'm glad you said it was the most difficult for you to write, because when I first read the title, I go, oh, here we go again, the boundaries, because I've seen the same thing, like as a parent, I wanted to set boundaries from my kids. You can only see me at certain office hours with my kids, that would have been wonderful, but you just can't do that in life all the time, because sometimes life just intrudes upon you. But one of the things I liked about this is again, because boundaries is so misunderstood, you give, and I don't even know if you realize you did, but I saw it like as a working definition of what boundaries are.
I did, and I really thought that one through.
Okay, and it's because it's mentioned 2 or 3 times. It's kind of like reading Judges, where that one phrase is mentioned several times. Boundaries are prioritized love. Is that the one you thought was? That's what I thought was like a working definition.
As far as I know, that's original.
Yeah.
I've never heard anyone else call it that.
Well, it's in here several times, so we'll give you credit for it.
All right, that's good.
When you see it in the Ozarks on a little cedar plaque, boundaries are love prioritized, you'll know that it's from you.
There we go.
With a little cross next to it and a little angel
Yeah,
on the other side.
we actually even made it its own paragraph.
It did, yeah. So I think several times. It's mentioned in here repeatedly. So let's talk about that. What the heck does that mean? What do boundaries are prioritized love?
Well, I mean, love should be at the center of everything we do as a Christian.
Okay.
And I believe that the sign of, we've talked about this in previous podcasts, is the sign of true maturity in any situation is, did it cause me to become more loving? And the challenge is, you only got so much to love to give. That's where God is so amazing. He's got all the love to give. He is love. But in terms of our life, there's only so much time, so much money, and so much energy. And we talked about it in a previous one, the whole book about the idea that you give what you value most, your time, money, and energy. You give those things to what you value most. So if you want to know what somebody values, you look at what they do with their time, with their money, and with their energy. Not what they say or think or feel. You just look at what they do, including yourself. And one of the things you got to evaluate is, what do I have time to give my best to? And if you're giving your best to everything, nothing's getting your best.
Okay.
If everything has equal value, nothing has value. So you can only give so much, and there's certain things in your life, I believe it's a God-honoring hierarchy of what deserves your greatest love. First thing, love God, then love people. And the love people, it's very up for grabs, right? Your spouse, I believe, should come first. Second, I believe, should be your kids. And then everything under there is kind of tricky, and it changes. Yeah. And there's some relationships that'll come and go. And what you got?
Well, I think you're kind of, just to clarify this, we're called to love everybody and to love but when you're talking about love, you're talking about taking action, because love's not really some kind of a feeling or an emotion. It's action.
Right.
It's doing something. It's a verb. You're doing something when you love. So you're saying, obviously Jesus said, love your neighbor and every man is your neighbor, that kind of thing. But what you're talking about here is who you're investing your time in, and that being
money and
time,
energy.
money, energy,
all your 3 greatest resources.
Yeah, as a demonstration of true love.
Yeah.
And so there you are very limited. So yes, you love everybody, but when it comes to giving your time, energy, and resources, if you do that to everybody, you're not going to have it for the people you really owe it to the most.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Which, when I was preparing, this came out of a message I gave. When I was preparing this, I was like, okay, I don't care what Henry Cloud says. I don't care what psychologists say. Did Jesus do this? And if you look at Jesus, he did. He was open to everyone, but he also had a circle of 12. He had a circle of 3. And he also had a very prioritized mission. And this is where one of these uncomfortable, savage Jesus moments comes in, not the kind we put on Hallmark cards, where this woman comes to him and she basically says, would you heal my daughter? And he ignores her. And then it says, she keeps going at him, and he says, I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And it says, but she came and knelt before him, say, Lord, help me.
And this was a Gentile woman.
This is a Gentile woman, right?
Yeah, that's why. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to unpack that in a second. And then he says, this is a savage Jesus moment. He says, it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. So this lady, she keeps on pushing. First of all, I'm like, did Jesus just call that lady a dog? Like, that's not cool. But what you realize here is, and he eventually healed her, which is fascinating because the people whose faith he was impressed most with tended to be Gentiles.
The only times he was amazed at their faith, it was always Gentiles.
Yeah.
It is. It's amazing.
Yeah, so meaning non-Jews.
Yeah,
but what
non-Jews.
is fascinating, because he says right now, my mission right now in this season is to bring this message to the Jews. And then from there, he actually releases Peter later on. After his death, Peter gets called to take this gospel, and Paul also does this job, to the Gentiles. But he knew right now, I can't focus on everyone. So my focus right now is on the Jews. And later, just a few short years later, it would open up to Gentiles. Now, any Gentile that pressed in and recognized who he was and what he offered, he would immediately respond. But he didn't I think that's what he's talking about, that don't throw pearls before swine. He was very selective about realizing what he had to give. And I mean, I don't know, maybe it's even an energy and power thing. I mean, at one point he said he felt power leave his body
that's true,
when a woman healed him. Maybe he's like, I just don't have the right now power or energy. I don't know. Bottom line is there was a boundary there, and he said why. But he opened the boundary when the woman showed respect for what he brought to the table and valued it to the point where it wasn't just taking from him just because she wanted something, but she understood what he had and what he had to offer.
Yeah, because they're I hate to say it this way, but if he can call her a dog, whether he did or not, there are always leeches in your life that'll suck you dry if you let them, And so I think that the boundary was set because this is what God called me to do right now. God has sent me to the lost sheep of Israel.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm called to do right now. But yeah, when there was that recognition, when there was that openness, he extended that boundary. So you mentioned it here. So yeah, that the idea is that sometimes we're not giving to everybody who asks of us. And you say you're going to get some pushback from that. But then there's a statement here that I think it's really great because my new motto, life is parenting, so ties in here. Sometimes love requires letting people experience the pain of their bad decisions. And in all my years of living and observing parents and seeing the result and the fruit of I've seen 3 major problems that parents have in training their kids. And this is one of the big ones. They save their kids from their the consequences of their bad choices, and usually even ungodly choices. And so I think, talk about that. Because again, I don't know, maybe moms have it harder than dads. I don't know, because it seems dads tend to feel like, he's getting what he deserved, whereas moms are they're designed to shield and protect and nurture and care for. And so it gets harder when they get a little older and they need to suffer the consequences of that. So yeah, I don't want to talk about that. You talk about it. Tell me what you say in here about that.
Yeah, well, let me rewind a little bit, because I think one of the things, and this is something you taught me, and then I learned it as I was studying psychology, like understanding when you cross a line, you're going to pay a price is one of the greatest gifts that can happen to us.
All right, yeah.
The line I use in here is, and I think this is original too, when boundaries are clear, it helps remove fear. They use that example. There's an example, it's been reiterated over and over again, where there's a school that's freshly built. They don't have a fence and it's right along a highway. They open it, the kids during playtime, they stay right close to the school. But as soon as the fence was built up against the highway, the kids would run and play in the whole yard. And there's this safety that comes with knowing here's the lines, here's the boundaries, and if I go over here, I'm okay, but if I pass that line, it's dangerous. And when boundaries aren't clear, it really just creates fear because you don't even know if you're going to be protected from anything. And I think that's the value of making it really clear to kids, if you do this, you will pay the price. And then when they do that, let them pay the price.
Yeah.
Because it's creating boundaries. And then they go, yeah, last time I did that, that did not go well. And mom and dad didn't bail me out, which is called being a grown-up.
Yeah.
When mom and dad can't bail you out anymore.
Yeah.
Big problem we have in our society. Mom and dad will keep bailing you out. And you say, well, I can't afford it. Houses are more expensive than ever. Yeah. Well, figure it out. They were really expensive when I was making, $3 an hour too.
Yeah.
And now, again, that sounds uncompassionate and there are extenuating circumstances. But I think in general, I think we're a little too soft right now on boundaries in those terms.
Yeah, because to figure it out, scarcity creates creativity. When resources are scarce, you're forced to be more creative, and you're forced to kind of toughen it up and maybe figure out how to make things work. And so I think in the same way, it's that idea of letting them not even suffer the consequences, but figure it out on their own and deal with some of the things that they have to. You mentioned in here too, here's another time, boundaries are prioritize love. You mentioned something about like some of the A.W. Tozer. I thought was an interesting little quote in there. I mean, in fact, I'm listening to one of his audiobooks right now. Well, one of his audiobooks, a book audio by him later. But you mentioned something about him, and do you remember that story?
Oh yeah, everybody loves A.W. Tozer and C.S. Lewis, but after he passed away, it says someone asked his wife. She got remarried to a business guy. Says someone asked her what it was like to be married to a man in business rather than ministry. She said something pretty potent. I've never been happier in my life. Aiden, that's A.W. Tozer, loved Jesus Christ, but Leonard Odom, he loves me. Ouch.
Yeah. Ouch.
It didn't sound like resentment, but
No.
It's just like, I was married to a man who was more obsessed with God than me. And again, it's supposed to be that way, but if it's unhealthy,
It is interesting because I when I hear that, I go back to, what did Jesus say? The two greatest commandments were love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But then he says the second is like it. So it's not like it's, so it's almost peer. They're almost, loving your neighbor as yourself. He says it's like it. He doesn't say, okay, so this is number one. And then after that, then you do number two. He says, and the second is like it. It's similar to it. It involves the same thing. So it all goes back to love.
Yeah.
Let me ask you too. Okay, so you talk about there's another quote in here that I think when facing stress, men tend to retreat. But you mentioned here about how people survive the best who don't retreat when they're under stress and strain, but they reach out to others. Some sort of surgery.
And Sean Acorn, The Happiness Advantage, did a lot of research on happiness. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was just thinking of the men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and how he talks about how men tend to, when they're under stress, they retreat to their cave. Women tend to connect with others and try to figure it out in groups. Men tend to try and do it on their own. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, Sean Acorn, he talks about that. He says the natural tendency is to pull away when life gets stressful, but the number one predictor of success when you're under stress, I mean, this is proven over and over again, is social engagement. It's getting tied in with community. At the very time, you're like, well, let me pull back. And I see this, we see this a lot of times with people that their marriage is struggling, they'll disappear for a while, and then they come back once it gets sorted out. Or they don't come back.
You never see them because they never got it sorted out. Because there was nobody there to help them sort it out. They were trying to figure it out on their own. And a lot of times, if you could have figured it out on your own, you would have figured it out. And so that's why we need other people. And I know sometimes we feel like, well, what do they know that I haven't figured out? But it's amazing when somebody's been down the road, they can come back and tell you what's down the road that you can't see.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have anything to do with them being smarter or anything. It's just they've been down the road a little further. Or maybe down a different road, and so they can tell you don't want to go down that road, which I think is kind of what Proverbs is all about. Here's a guy who's been down every single road, as we read in Ecclesiastes, and he says, now if you take the road of generosity, this is what's going to happen. If you take the road of stinginess, this is what's going to happen. And so he's constantly, Proverbs, giving us which road to take so we don't have to suffer the pain of going down there and finding out it's a bad road to choose.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the essence of the book. We could go more into it, but I'll leave some mystery for you in it. But the books, keep it light. It's available now. The Freedom of Priorities in Life, Work, and Love. It's a great chapter on boundaries, and it's available anywhere books are sold. So go out and get yourself a copy.
Thanks for listening. Please consider sharing this with your friends on the platform of your choice. For more from Joel Malm, visit joelmalm.com. For more from Rick Malm, visit rickmalm.com. Our podcast music was produced by Alex Burleson.